Greetings from Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. My name is Alexander C. Aldrich, and I work in the Department of World Languages and Cultures. And today I will be discussing adult early bilingual speech rhythm with evidence from Spanish and English. So to begin, just a very brief, simple review of the concept of rhythm. We can say that it is the up and down, strong and weak patterns of prosodic patterns of speech. And over time, three distinct rhythm classes have been proposed. There is mora-timed rhythm, such as in the Japanese language. Then, of course, syllable-timed rhythm in languages similar to Spanish, and stress-timed rhythm in languages similar to English. And it is these latter two that I will be focusing my comments on principally today. And although there has been some debate in the literature regarding the categoricity of rhythm classes, we do know that multiple studies have found evidence of the psychological reality of rhythm classes, and it is upon this assumption that I will be basing my research today. So to begin, we know that little is really known about speech rhythm in early bilingual adults. However, there is a theory, of course, that we can perhaps apply that would help us predict outcomes, what we would expect in terms of the rhythm production in early bilingual adults, particularly those who speak two languages whose rhythm classes are different. And we could use the language from the second language linguistic perception model, developed principally by Escudero. And this model, although originally designed with segmental development in mind in bilinguals, we can use the language which would suggest the following. First and second language perception grammars are independent from one another, and this may be true, of course, for the prosodic interface as well. Then we have the initial state of the L2 perception grammar is a copy of that of the L1. And as the individual is increasingly exposed to exemplars from the L2, those categories are then updated in the L2 grammar. And the L2 grammar may be observed empirically through production. In other words, we can see the state of the categories in the L2 grammar through production. One study that researched rhythm in early bilinguals was Henriksen and Fafulas, 2017, and they researched Spanish Yagua bilinguals, early Spanish Yagua bilinguals. Yagua is a language from the Amazon region in South America, and they found that as a group, these individuals displayed rhythm values that were intermediate between monolingual Spanish and L1 Yagua. And they also found that language dominance, whether the individual was Spanish or Yagua dominant at the individual level, was relevant to their results. They did not study, and it was not perhaps an aim of their research, whether the Spanish and Yagua for the bilinguals was different from one another. But we do know that they displayed intermediate values between monolingual Spanish and L1 Yagua. Bunta and Ingram, on the other hand, in 2007, they found in their adult early Spanish-English bilinguals that in terms of proficiency, they stated that these speakers were fluent in both languages. And they used two metrics, the normalized pairwise variability index for vocalic intervals and the normalized pairwise variability index for intervocalic intervals to measure rhythm. And they did find that rhythm was different between their Spanish and English in these speakers. On the other hand, Carter and Wolford in 2016 also studied a sample from a similar population. However, the proficiency of the speakers in either language is unknown. Rhythm was different between Spanish and English as well. They used one metric, the pairwise variability index, to measure rhythm. It's important to highlight, however, that we saw from Henriksen and Fafulas that language dominance is relevant to rhythm in early bilinguals, and that many studies in the literature agree that multiple metrics, interval rhythm metrics, should be used to study rhythm. Which leads us to the research questions today. Firstly, what is the nature of speech rhythm in adult early bilinguals of Spanish and English? And do they really exhibit, as something we would expect, a separation between their Spanish and English rhythm patterns? And if so, is this pattern consistent across methods of measurement? Based on previous research, we would suppose that yes, they would show a difference, a separation, language-specific properties of rhythm between Spanish and English. And my hypothesis is that across multiple methods of measurement, that this pattern would be mostly consistent. So I recruited 9 female adult speakers who were born and raised in the southwestern United States. They were not fluent in any language besides English and Spanish, and Spanish was spoken in their home since they were children. We obtained various scores of proficiency. The first being their age of acquisition of English. It was reported around a mean value of 4 years old when English was acquired, and they all reported having learned Spanish from birth. The speakers reported that their speaking proficiency in English was 5.4 on average on a scale of 0 to 7, with 7 being very good, and 4.2 for Spanish. They all participated in the Lextail vocabulary discrimination task, and in this task they are asked to discriminate the word that is presented to them as either a word or non-word in that language, and in English they scored 81% correct, and in Spanish 60% correct. And for their language bilingual profile, which is a measure of their language dominance, that goes from anywhere from negative 218, which would be entirely Spanish dominant, to positive 218, which would be entirely English dominant, they scored on average a 50. And these scores measure or compare similarly to measures, very similar measures from samples of a similar population in other studies as well, not related to rhythm. The materials were laboratory materials. They spoke out loud 8 complete sentences. These sentences excluded rhotic and lateral phonemes, as well as glides at syllable boundaries. An example in Spanish is "Te digo que Pepe nunca pasa tiempo en esta discoteca," which roughly translated means "I'm telling you that Pepe never spends time at this club." And in English, one example of materials is "Dad posted on Facebook that he got a job as a mechanic." The recordings were done from a computer screen. The materials, rather, were presented on a computer screen in pseudo-random order and were recorded in a sound-attenuated booth using professional recording equipment. The segmentation was done by hand, and I used the spectral information in waveform shape to guide the segmentation. Contiguous vowels were segmented as a vowel interval, as were contiguous consonants a consonant interval. And intersentential pauses were excluded from the analysis. The rhythm metrics obtained from the data were the delta scores, which essentially are the standard deviation of the vocalic or consonantal intervals, respectively. The Varco scores, which are a normalized version of the delta scores. And those together can be considered measures of rhythm globally, whereas we also have the pairwise variability indices, the normalized for vocalic intervals, and the raw for intervocalic intervals, which could be considered local rhythm, or measures of local rhythm. Speech rate was also obtained, as was %V, or the percentage of the utterance that is vocalic. In total, 142 tokens were included in the final analysis. The data were averaged over items for a by subjects analysis and then submitted to repeated measures ANOVAs. The dependent variable in all cases was the rhythm metric, and the within subjects independent variable was language. Spanish or English were the 2 conditions in that variable. The results indicate, for most metrics, a robust difference between Spanish, and English. In almost all cases, English was considerably more variable than Spanish for the interval metrics. We see that for delta V, that is true, for delta C as well, for Varco V and Varco C, for NPVIV and RPVIC. In all cases presented here, these differences were significant, and they were the effect size was large, of at least 0.49 or greater. In terms of percent V, there was no difference found. Spanish had a mean of approximately 49.66, whereas English's was 49.44. And this finding, as will be discussed, is actually rather intuitive based on percent V measures from samples of populations similar to those collected here for English and Spanish, North American English, as well as Canadian English. In many studies is reported as about 49 or so, and for Spanish as well. For speech rate, there was a small effect found in which Spanish was slightly faster than English, or had a greater speech rate rather, and this effect size was small, 0.06. The current study, to conclude and summarize the research today, it presents comprehensive rhythm production data from 9 female, slightly English-dominant early Spanish bilinguals, and a detailed account of the speaker's linguistic experience is provided, and this is partly a contribution as well to the literature. The speech rhythm from these speakers was analyzed via interval metrics and speech rate as well for the following metrics. Analyses of variance reported large significant effects of language on rhythm for these speakers. Or in other words, language-specific rhythm patterns were found in the expected direction for English and Spanish, with Spanish being significantly less variable from one interval to the next, or all intervals from one utterance, than English. And this was true for global measures of rhythm, the delta scores and the Varco scores, and for local measures of rhythm, the normalized pairwise variability indices. Even for those measures of rhythm that were normalized for differences in speech rate, including the Varco scores and the normalized pairwise variability index, still reported large significant language-specific effects of rhythm in these speakers. We also find that percent V is likely not a reliable measure of rhythm for this population, for those reasons already explained. That in Spanish and North American English, many studies have reported similar numbers. Where we would certainly most likely expect a difference would be between perhaps British English, which British English speakers and Spanish, due to British English's larger or greater propensity toward vowel reduction. We would expect a smaller percent V score in English, British English rather, than in North American English. We also saw that speech rate was greater in Spanish than in English, and this is intuitive when one considers the phonetic manifestation of language structure as measured here through the vowel and consonantal intervals. We would expect a greater number of vowel and consonantal intervals, or you could even say syllables as well, per second in Spanish due to its simpler syllable structure than English. So this finding is intuitive. Future research, however, should compare speech rate to Spanish and English monolinguals. And to conclude, we can use the language from the second language linguistic perception model, in which early Spanish and English bilinguals, we can say that they maintain their perception grammars updated. These findings suggest a unique abstract organization of language at the prosodic level for early Spanish-English bilinguals. And I thank you for your attention today, and I'd like to close with an acknowledgement that this research was supported by a Graduate and Professional Student Council Research and Project Grant from the University of Arizona. Thank you, and may you all be well.